it later. But like he doesn't he's never alone
Yeah.
by choice, you know. And so the times when I would catch him alone with his kid, he's just a great guy, a really great dad, you know. I respect that about him. But then have
Yeah.
the moments when he's just like contemplating, you could see wheels, you really get a sense of a person's, you know, psyche when they're alone, especially when they're not alone that often, because like they're almost they're more naked, you know. And so I love those moments on the North Shore, just because we've all seen the pictures of whether they're, you know, on the wave doing something spectacular, or they're about to paddle out and they're surrounded by crowds or whatever. But it's just like everybody goes home and goes to sleep alone every night or next to somebody, you know what I mean? But it's like they don't sleep next to crowds, and so it's really interesting to have that insight. You know?
Did so this book, this project, you know, that took 10 years. When you were building up to it, because you were originally you were supposed to do a photo shoot. It was for a magazine, Revolver, was it?
It
No,
was
not someone.
God, I can't even think of it now. It's Radar.
Radar. Sorry, it was an
Yeah.
R. I knew it was an R. I was like,
Good.
oh,
I'm
Radar.
impressed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then they folded right
Yeah.
before you were supposed to, and
Yeah.
you were able to hustle your way in there. Did did the expectations of the North Shore that you had before, how did that stack up to what you actually experienced? Because I know I always have an imagination of what it's like. And it's funny, like I've never got to experience the North Shore winter. My brother got to, and I got to do it vicariously through him, but I never got to really properly do it because one, I was traveling places that had no people instead.
Yeah.
Two, I didn't want to get beat up by anyone. I only got to spend a summer there researching for a final project at school, but it's still, you know, I only got a taste, but to be there when all that energy, did it live up to the expectation? Did it exceed? Did it change how you saw surfing?
I think it did live up to it ultimately, but it was definitely a progression. And I mean, I think if you look at, you said to say there's 1,000 photographs in the book.
Yeah.
The latter half of the decade is definitely more represented than in the beginning, and that just speaks to access and
Yeah.
relationships, you know. And I remember, you know, the first, it's literally like my first week on the North Shore, and this guy Troy Eckert, who's like an old executive
Legend,
at
dude.
Volcom. So he was one of my.
Stony Baloney. Just got to say that. That's like one of the best fucking
Love it.
surf movies.
We used to have a VHS copy at the bungalow in Rockaway pre-Sandy, but we lost it. But yeah, that was like
Green
a.
machine. Green machine.
So he was like one of my first. Him and Pat O'Connell were like literally the only two people, my, you know, ambassadors on the North Shore. Kind of just rolled up, and someone's like, "Oh yeah, call this guy, Troy, will hook you up." And you know, I wasn't able to link up with him. I didn't answer my call the first day or something, and I distinctly remember like sitting on the beach, like looking up at the Volcom house, just with like awe. Like I was like, I'm a grown ass man, but at the time, I felt like a little kid. You feel like, what goes on over there? You know, like what? And like, you know, like a
Do
kid
I want to know?
looking at like Zeppelin backstage, like what goes on? You know, and then so I still have that sensibility, you know, and then you know, cut to a week later when I, you know, was introduced and did get to go in there, and then but still like every year. You know, like a relationship at one house isn't necessarily transferable to the other house. So it's like it took, you know, years before I could really be able to go like one, two, three, and just be able to like have access to all of those different lawns. You know, so it was definitely a progression. And I probably, it's a good thing. I don't think I ever really experienced a lot of violence, which I thought would maybe be more. Which isn't to say that it wasn't there, and it definitely tapered
Well,
entirely
you
later in the
quote you
years. But
wrote in Stab, I believe, like in a caption, like about the gentrification and all. Listed a whole bunch of reasons why
like
it's all
social
changing.
media,
Phone
real estate
camera, yeah,
prices,
yeah.
phone camera. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors, and that's why I think the book is really interesting. You know, even though it's basically it's 10 years, but it's not an even year. It's basically from like 2008 9 to 18 19, but it just by coincidence it tended to be a pretty interesting bookmark. You know, between all of those developments with, you know, social media, real estate prices, the ASP to the WSL, how that changed, the Brazilian storm, and then
Andy
now
Irons.
Andy Irons, and then now with COVID, it's like that's a pretty fucking distinct, you know,
Yeah.
bookmark of like a change of an era. So I'm glad that you know we did the book when we did, and I think it's a pretty special like yearbook of that decade. You know.
it is. It's very much you get to document like a handing of a generation over too, from like the Mick Fanning, Joel Parko generation onto the Gabriel, Idolo, Felipe. You get to see that kind of arc with John and Gabriel, and you can see it, and that I think is really fascinating. It reminds me, there's a lot of photos from 75 busting down the door, era, but I always feel like 75, 74, 73, 72, it's like gets overshadowed sometimes, and you're able to capture that, that kind of missing link. People are going to look back and originally remember just certain dead stop moments, and people can go use this book as a wonderful arc of a transition of power in some ways in surfing.
Yeah, I mean, and this kind of speaks back to, I'm fine with it now, but like almost like a little disappointed at like the lack of interest from some of the athletes that were in the book to be like, oh, this is amazing. Because like I know deep in my heart, and it's like I captured these moments that they're going to appreciate later in life, I mean, and it's funny because I'm experiencing that now with some of the music artists that I've shot 10, 15 years ago. Like I'm working on a big project with Outkast right now, like putting together, pulling stuff from the archive, like literally like dust. It's a huge endeavor because it's pre-digital. So it's like I'm literally pulling shit out of a closet and dust, and it's it's a lot of work. But they're the ones asking the photos from me now. It's almost like in reverse. So it's I really, that's the most special thing. And some people do get it. Like there's a couple moments in that book that I had with Mick that I know, that's my gift to him. He's such a beautiful person. And like, I'm just so happy to be able to like kind of give him those moments captured forever,
Well, if there's anyone who I think has the life experience to appreciate what they have, is Mick Fanning. I mean, he's lost so much in his life, people close to him, that I think he has that emotional awareness that I think a lot of younger professional surfers, I feel like professional surfers, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know too many, but it from a far view, it feels like a lot of their emotional intelligence really happens a lot later in their growth, because they almost live in this Peter Pan-like world in their 20s, like traveling the world, getting paid to surf. Yeah, you have no real.
But it's also a very like singular experience.
Totally,
they're not traveling the world like. I mean, I can't even think of an example, but like it's a very like specific experience.
Yes,
doesn't. And
it's in a bubble too.
It's totally in a bubble, and not only is it in a bubble, but this speaks back to of how we retooled the podcast of going from specific surf to like broader. I think there's this like view from people within surf to be myopic and be like, this is a huge scene and surf. Dude, no one gives a shit about surfing. Yeah. Like surfing is smaller than competitive chess. You know what I mean? Like nobody cares about surfing except for us. You know what I mean? Like
it's funny, and it's also, I would have thought a lot more pro surfers would have a more worldly view of everything, and it doesn't feel like that, particularly with what's been happening over the past 6 months in the world. Like I feel like you've really, like, that sort of stuff has seeped into surfing, and you've seen like where a lot of people, where their worldviews are and where they think, and I'm surprised not more people are more accepting of cultures and people. I don't know, it just feels. Sorry to go down this well here.
Yeah, no,
but it needs to be discussed. Like these are role models and athletes, and a lot of them have, the whole Tyler Wright, where she put Black Lives Matter on her surfboard, and the comment section is just shocking. I thought surfers were probably more progressive, particularly in the 90s in the surf magazines. I remember reading so much more progressivism. So it's fascinating to see. I mean, it's all laid bare.
It's funny. I mean, even in the North Shore, I talked about a little bit in the book how, even though it has this veneer of like beautiful atmospherics and laid back, like it's a very conservative place. Not politically speaking, but just even like I remember a couple of seasons ago, like wearing skinny jeans was like a big deal, you know, and it's like if you go by like a
Yeah.
5'11" or 6'1" thruster, that's like outside of the paradigm, you know, it's like a very, you know, it can be very conservative. And then you add politics on top of that, and it's like, you know, you can fill in the blanks, you know, and that's same in California. I mean, look at like all the, you know, surf hubs of California, whether it's like Orange County or California, like it's a bunch of like Republicans driving pickup trucks. It's kind of jockey, you know, it really is.
It's super jolly. It's fascinating. Like I yeah, there's I mean I can go into this, but I'd rather not because it's just it's too frustrating, I think. But I mean, I do find like I am surprised by a lot of people's reactions, and I am, you know, and I think surfing it can be really insular, and particularly with the being a professional surfer. And professional surfer now, as compared to maybe 20 or 30 years ago, now there's so many more handlers and people to
Oh yeah.
protect you. And one of the things you mention even in the book and talk about with like John's access, and from there's a difference from when he won the world title to before he won the world title, your ability to access him. And I wonder, did you see that progression throughout the North Shore, not just with John, but everyone, the sophistication maybe of people's brands?
A little bit. I mean, him specifically, and like, and I wasn't just, you know, there's a lot of people in the book. I mean, clarify, like,
Yeah.
the North Shore is, I was fortunate enough to get to access, let's say let's call them like watering holes, you know,
Hmm.
these like kind of lawns in front of these team houses. And like, I had access there because of, you know, whoever. And once you're in, you're in. But
Yeah.
I don't have a close relationship with a lot of people that are actually in the book. And that's what's kind of interesting about it, because I have access
Yeah.
to this scenario and I can kind of like lean back and get these really intimate moments, but like I'm not like bud with all these people.
Yeah.
Like John, I shot a lot. You know, like I shot him for personally. I shot him for Nixon. I shot like I'd been to his house. Like I had pretty good access to him, and you know the difference after he won the title, like it was really dramatic. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and that's fine. And I totally, a lot of that has to do with, I think, who he is as a person. Like, it's not just that he was like, oh, I'm famous now. And all that. He's just like, he's just a very, like, kind of personal person to begin with. He's a very, you know, like, reserved person. And just
Yeah.
like, now there's so much of that I'm just going to put at this wall, and that's fine. With other people, it's hard to say, you know, like I did definitely see a transition of more so people just weren't around. I think a lot social media has a lot to do with it, because like on it used to be the first couple years, if there was no waves, like everyone's just like, all right, well, it's flat today, we're gonna hang out and blah blah. And then it was like the later years, like when it was flat, like there's nobody around. Like I was like, where are you all?
Wow.
And everyone's on the computer, like editing clips, or you know what I mean? Like it just was it was
That's
strange.
that's fascinating. Like that, and those are the things that I'm very curious about, are the transitions, like the technological effects on the North Shore. You know, the way how professional athletes operate in a post social media world. You know, or you know, from pre to post. You know, it was, they didn't have as much control over their image and what they want, and now they can, but there's also a lot more responsibility placed
Yeah,
on them because
because
of
it's
that.
not enough. It's not enough to just be like an amazing surfer right now. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, especially, you know, today. But even like 8 months ago or 10 months ago, when like the whole Hurley thing fell apart, like it's not enough to just be a great surfer. Like you gotta be a brand. I'm just so tired. I hate that fucking word. I'm so tired of it.
No,
But
it
I get it.
sucks.
You know what I mean? I'm like, but I understand it from a
Uh,
company's perspective. I'm like, what are you delivering? You know, like just that whole business model of like, okay, we find somebody who's really good at what they do, and we throw money at them, and then they make our brand cool or big or legitimate. Like that's dead, you know. And
yeah.
so there's been a transition of that for sure. But you know, it's interesting. Like there even my friend Duncan Campbell, who's like he's a Malcolm Campbell brother.
Cafe
So
Haleiwa, baby.
exactly. So Cafe Haleiwa used to be like, and this maybe I caught obviously the tail end of it when I first started, but the first 2-3 years, like that was the spot. You go there on a Sunday and it was like the Ivy for surfers, you know, or like, you know, like Spago or whatever. I don't know. I don't hang out in Hollywood. I'm throwing like 20-year-old references.
It was the brunch
like the Merv Griffin
man.
show of surf.
Yeah.
but
it's like Katz's Deli.